Well, hello, good morning. Welcome to Lent, 2025. We are gathered here today on this first Sunday in Lent, and it is also daylight savings, so I know I'm a little groggy. I was also out in Norwich, which is just on the edge of Williamsburg yesterday for Epic. We had a few folks from church there. It was good. There's a musician from somewhere out east. I want to say, I don't know if it's Norfolk or Virginia Beach, one of the bigger churches out there. And this man is so gifted. He has played for our ministerium gatherings in October before, and he just, like we sang the song, right, where you have a refrain and then he would sing the verses, and he's playing and singing at the same time, and he made the piano match the story of the song, and he was just ad-libbing things in it. It's a wonderful time of worship, good workshops. I led a workshop on doing Bible studies that shape your biblical identity. So that's kind of my happy place. And so I was thinking of all of you yesterday while doing that, but we had a decent turnout. People seemed to get some things out of it. But between all of that and daylight savings, I am groggy. And I will also say that these books, we're doing this book called Lest Innocent Blood Be Shed. It's a book that I read in an ethics class in seminary a long time ago. It's a true story. It's out of print, but plenty of used copies out there. So we have them for about $5 each. If that's an issue, we have funds to cover that, but if you can reimburse, you can. Okay. Some folks ordered their own and they're on their way, but we do have a big pile here at church to read. But since they didn't come in until Friday afternoon, and since you all haven't had a chance to read it yet, and because it's daylight savings, we're going to take it easy today. I've just identified a couple of passages from the kind of preface and the first chapter. We'll just read a couple of passages together, get an idea for this book. And then we'll try to read. I mean, it's a long book. There's no way we're going to cover everything in the 6 weeks of Lent, but we'll try to, I'll invite you all to read chunks of it each week, and we'll just pick up certain passages as we go. But there's 5 main parts, so that's kind of a good way to do it. We'll do one part per Sunday of Lent. So today we'll just kind of dip our toes in. And then for the next week, it'll be part 1, the week after part 2, and we'll get through part 5 by the time we get to Palm Sunday. So that's the plan. I think I asked this before, has anybody read this before? Okay, has anybody seen that there's a documentary that covers the same subject matter? It's called Weapons of the Spirit. Has anybody heard of that or ever seen that? It's really hard to find it. We could have just watched that today. But couldn't find it. It's out of circulation. Check the libraries, check the online things, check streaming services. Could not. But it was on PBS, right? It's that kind of a documentary. It was well done, but it's just not up there. Some things, even if they're good, fade out of time. If there's not a big demand to watch it, it just kind of fades out. But we'll get into it. So let's just start with the back. During the most terrible years of World War II, when inhumanity and political insanity held most of the world in their grip, and the Nazi domination of Europe seemed irrevocable and unchallenged, a miraculous event took place in a small Protestant town in southern France called Les Chambon. There, quietly, peacefully, and in full view of the Vichy government and a nearby division of the Nazi SS, Les Chambon's villagers and their clergy organized to save thousands of Jewish children and adults from certain death. So the government in France pretty much capitulated. It was Nazi occupied. It wasn't a complete military takeover like other parts of Europe in that time, but they were definitely collaborating. There was resistance, right? Maybe you've seen movies or read books, seen shows about that. But there was, this resistance movement within France. It was aided by the Allies, and there's lots of good thrillers about that, right? of the code breakers and the Americans and the British supporting underground events, but that's not this, right? This is a different story. So let's just start with page 1. Should be titled Prelude. Okay.
This is the rest of the leaders.
Oh, okay. Okay, so I have a later edition with an extra.
Prelude is-
Oh, you want the prelude,
Yeah.
you wanna read the prelude?
Do you have the prelude?
Yeah, back up, okay.
Yeah, we'll get to part 1, which is persons and the arrest of the leaders. But before that, do people have this thing that's called prelude? Yep, you got it, all right. I don't need to read all of this out loud, but maybe we can go around the circle. Maybe just do a paragraph at a time. I want to start here on page 1 and go to the break on page 4, just to set the tone. So somebody jump in, we'll do popcorn style, right? One person ends, the next person just picks it up. I trust you all to do that.
And once was an art critic, I've been told, he had a sure way of identifying ancient Maltese art objects. He found himself crying before them. John Keats had a similar reaction to excellence. The thought of his beloved Fanny Brawne or anything he associated with her goes through me like a spear, he said.
Of course, there are symptoms of awareness of excellence. They are mere reactions, not rules, that we ordinary people can use to separate excellent things from dross. But any doctor will tell you that symptoms are important. And just as pain can be a symptom of disease, painful joy can be a reliable reaction to excellence.
One afternoon, I was reading some documents relating to Adolf Hitler's 12-year empire. It was not the politics of these years that was the center of my concern. It was the cruelty perpetrated in the death camps of Central Europe. For years, I had been studying cruelty, the slow crushing and grinding of a human being by other human beings. I had studied the tortures white men inflicted upon Native Indians and then upon Blacks in the Americas, and now I was reading mainly about the torture experiments the Nazis conducted upon the bodies of small children in those death camps.
Across all these studies, the pattern of the strong crushing the weak kept repeating itself and repeating itself. So that when I was not bitterly angry, I was bored at the repetition of the patterns of the persecution. When I was not desiring to be cruel with the cruel, I was a monster like perhaps many others around me, who could look upon torture and death without a shudder, and who therefore looked upon life without a belief in its preciousness. My study of evil incarnate had become a prison whose bars were my bitterness toward the violent, and whose walls were my horrified indifference to slow murder. Between the bars and the walls, I revolved like a madman. Reading about the damned, I was damned myself, as damned as the murderers and damned as their victims. Somehow, over the years, I had dug myself into hell, and I had forgotten redemption, had forgotten the possibility of escape.
On this particular day, I was reading an anthology of documents from the Holocaust, and I came across a short article about a small village in the mountains of southern France. As usual, I was reading the pages with an effort at objectivity. I was trying to sort out the forms and elements of cruelty or resistance to it in much the same way as a veterinarian might sort out ill from a healthy cattle. After all, I was doing this work not to torture myself, but to understand the indignity and dignity of man.
About halfway down the third page of the account of this village, I was annoyed by a strange sensation on my cheeks. The story was so simple and so factual that I had found it easy to concentrate upon it, not upon my own feelings. And so, still following the story and thinking about how neatly some of this fit in the told parents.
Persecution. Pattern.
Patterns.
Oh, come on.
Paris. No, I couldn't see. Okay. Of persecution, I reached up on my cheek to wipe away a bit of the dust, and I felt fears upon my fingertips. No one or two drops. My whole cheek was wet.
My sentimental mind told me you are losing your grasp on things again. Instead of learning about cruelty, you are becoming one more of its victims. You are doing it again. I was disgusted with myself for daring to intrude.
And so I closed the book and left my college office. When I came home, my operatic Italian wife and my turbulent children, as they have never failed to do, distracted me noisily. I hardly felt the spear that had gone through me. But that night, when I lay on my back in bed with my eyes closed, I saw more clearly than ever the images that had made me weep. I saw the two clumsy khaki-colored buses of the Vichy French police pull into the village square. I saw the police captain facing the pastor of the village and warning him that if he did not give up the names of the Jews they had been sheltering in the village, he and his fellow pastor, as well as the families who had been caring for the Jews, would be arrested. I saw the pastor refuse to give up these people who had been strangers in his village, even at the risk of his own destruction.
Then I saw the only two police could find. And I saw the only two police could find sitting in an otherwise empty bus. I saw a 13-year-old boy, the son of the pastor, pass a piece of his precious chocolate through the window to the prisoner, while 20
John,
well, okay,
Yeah, French police.
who were guarding the lone prisoner watch. And then I saw the villagers passing their little gifts through the window until there were gifts all around him. Most of them food in those hungry days during the German occupation of France.
Lying there in bed, I began to weep again. I thought, why run away from what is excellent simply because it goes through you like a spear? Lying there, I knew that always a certain region of my mind contained an awareness of men and women in bloody white coats breaking and re-breaking the bones of 6 or 7 or 8-year-old Jewish children in order, the Nazi said, to study the processes of natural healing in young bodies. All of this I knew, but why not know joy? Why not leave room for comfort? Why add myself to the millions of victims? Why must life be for me with that vision of those children lying there with their children's eyes looking up at the adults who were breaking a leg for the 2nd time, a rib cage for the 3rd time? Something had happened for years in that mountain village. Why should I be afraid of it?
To the dismay of my wife, I left the bed unable to say a word, dressed, crossed the dark campus on a starless night, and read again those few pages on the village of Les Chambons-sur-Lignon. And to my surprise, again the spear, again the tears, again the frantic, painful pleasure that spills into the mind when a deep, deep need is being satisfied, or when a deep wound is starting to heal.
That night, I decided to try and understand all this. I decided to understand it so that I can hold it more firmly than one can hold a tear or an image. Since I was a student and a teacher of ethics, I would use what I had learned about man's standard of ethical excellence to help me understand the blessing, at least for me, of Les Chambons. Those involuntary tears have been an experience of moral praise pressed out of my whole personality like the juice of a grape. And part of that personality had been the idea of goodness and of evil that I had been learning and teaching for decades.
I was not going to make Luxembourg an example of goodness or moral nobility. I was not going to use this story to explain some abstract idea of ethics. Ends are more valuable than the means. Understanding that story was my end, my goal, and I was going to use the words of a philosophical ethics only as a means for achieving this goal. Or to be more accurate, I was going to use the words of ethics to help me understand my deeply felt ethical praise for the deeds of the people of Lochain.
Thank you. Everybody. Um, there's the reason why the author wrote this book. Studying the horrors of Nazi experiments. And then, I love this. Involuntary tears as an expression of moral praise pressed out of my whole personality like the juice of a grape. It got through the sort of cynical defensive shell he had put up around him and got the spear brought out of motion. Looking at, there's a phrase on page 1. We talked about symptoms, just like symptoms of a disease help you get to the bottom of the disease. Painful joy can be a reliable reaction to excellence. Have you ever felt painful joy? Have you ever looked at one of your kids or somebody in your life who overcomes something and you feel joy that they've accomplished it, but the pain that they had to go through? That's the example I thought of. Have you ever experienced painful joy?
Cancer.
Yeah.
Because post-op was pure unadulterated hell.
Yeah, it's a very literal painful joy.
Yeah.
I guess you could say, when I watched my sister recover from the bout of Guillain-Barré that she had, and how she recovered from that, it was painful to watch her go through it, but it was joy when she was done.
I feel like God probably experiences painful joy on our behalf all the time. We're getting through things. Healing,
Jesus definitely did.
yeah. Getting right into the heart of Lent right now, right? Introspection, putting yourself at the foot of the cross. Why are we doing these things? You know, how do we get rid of the obstacles and get back to God, right? How do we acknowledge our mortality? That's Ash Wednesday, right? Remember that you are dust, and to dust you shall return. You can see that without having to get as dark as he did looking at Nazi experiments, but we can see the problems and the hurts in the world. How does joy penetrate that? How do we get Easter in the middle of Ash Wednesday? Those two go together.
I think that's something that Pastor Lou did, was to bring the ARC kids
Oh, yeah.
to certain activities. And, it's painful to see people who are affected that way, but it's a joy to minister to them.
Do you feel like they ever ministered to you? Did you receive anything from them being there too?
Well, greetings, I guess, and, pleasure that they were invited. So,
I used to, when I lived in Lynchburg, when I first got out of the service, there was a ARC used Goodwill.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And they were getting a lot of appliances and things like that in that they couldn't sell because they couldn't check them out. So I worked there part-time, free for them, and fixed all their equipment for them. And that place was operated by ARC individuals.
Yeah.
With adult supervision and well, with supervision, I should say.
I know.
And I they were, quite innocent, and really didn't realize they had a problem. A lot of them,
Yeah,
they didn't see it being a problem.
yeah, and some would say like, do they have a problem?
Yeah, they didn't seem to have a problem, but, that's the reason I did it, because, they were having all these things, that they were just throwing away, and I couldn't see that happening, so. I went and repaired their equipment for free. I did that for about 2 years.
Yeah.
When I finally had to leave, but, it was fulfilling, but what I got out of that was they didn't know they had a problem.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes you wonder sometimes, how does God see us, right? Yeah, we're trying our best.
If you have lunch with the kids who come from
Hanover Adult Center.
yeah. I mean, not all of them, there's all different personalities, but there's a couple girls that are just so bubbly and so full of life, and, I don't think they think that there's anything wrong with them whatsoever. I mean, they just, you know.
You are.
They knew everybody thought they had something wrong with them, but they themselves.
Well, in fact, I can't see anything wrong, because I keep wondering, why are they going there? Because they're so bubbly and outgoing, they seem perfectly fine to me, but obviously there must be something, or they wouldn't be going there.
But that's what impressed me. They didn't feel like they had a problem.
Mhm.
Everybody else thought they had a problem, but they couldn't see it, which I thought was really unique,
There's something to that.
different perspective on the situation.
Um. That was a great examples. Thank you for sharing those. So yeah, there's this joy breaking through the pain. On the second page, he talks about his bars and his walls, right? This thing he chose to study as a teacher of ethics and a student of ethics, good and evil. And he talks about the damned, right? That he was feeling as damned as the people he was studying. And then he says in the middle of page 2, somehow over the years I had dug myself into hell. That made me think of some of the Psalms where they talk about, I have been, sent down to Sheol. That's the Hebrew word for like the pit. Right? The Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, didn't have the same conception of hell like Christians have built up over the years. Mostly it's not so much to the Bible as it is to like John Milton writing Paradise Lost or Dante's Inferno. Like that's where a lot of our thoughts of hell, or even Greek mythology, like the tailored punishments and things like that. I saw a meme the other day, and it was salty language, but it was a picture of the guy pushing the rock up the hill, and it was labeled the dishes and the laundry, right? Like, but in the Old Testament, it'll talk about Sheol, this place of shadows, the pit, right, where what was once alive is now just a shadow of its former self. And so there's this idea, especially in the Psalms, of, I will go down to the pit, I will go down to Sheol. My life won't have substance anymore. That's what this made me think of. I had dug myself into hell. So we've talked about joy breaking through pain. We've talked about this a little bit in past conversations. And I think the Women's Bible Study is looking at this book called Love Wins that talks about heaven and hell. So what is there hell on earth, right? Is there living hells going on right now? Living, now at like current day pits and Sheols. And if so, what is it? What situations would you describe today as hells that people have dug themselves into? I'll start. Addiction. I've seen families torn apart by addiction, both the individual who is addicted, but also their family who kind of sits helpless, not knowing how to help, how to intervene, sometimes saying we had to let this person we love hit rock bottom. Or like, we have to sit back and watch this. That's one I think of digging yourself into a hell. This guy It was trying to understand the depths of evil in the world. What are some other hells that people experience right now?
One of the things, there's wars.
Yeah.
One of the things that Ladies Bible Study, I think we're on the chapter of hell right now, aren't we? I think, and I think one of them that it said was depression.
Mhm. Depression is depression is a normal physical response to an overwhelming amount of stress or distress in your life, right? It slows down your responses so that you can still function. But sometimes, as I had somebody describe it to me, you get stuck in the on position. But there's that cycle of depression of I need to do these things, but I can't do these things, and not seeing the light, turning in on yourself, not feeling the value of yourself. Yeah, that's a hell.
I was watching a YouTube program about an anesthesiologist. And he says that it's very important that if you come for an operation, that he knows if you are a depressed individual. Because it makes a difference of what chemicals he uses, because they can actually, depression is not just mental, it's physical.
Yeah, it's killing.
And if you don't know exactly what kind of depression or that you're depressed, he could actually put the wrong chemicals together and injure you.
Yeah.
So that was a shocking thing I never thought about before, that it's not only mental, but it takes on physical connotations as well.
Yeah, the Eastern world, Eastern medicine has a much better understanding and acceptance of that your emotions and your spirit and your mental state are all tied together with your physical. Western culture is like, well, suck it up, right? Like treat the symptoms, treat the disease, and everything else is your problem. Kind of ignoring that interconnectedness. I think we're getting there on that, but definitely. I also want to come back to what Susie said. I don't want to gloss over that. War. When you read stories of soldiers who come back from war, not just the PTSD of what happened around them, the bombs exploding, like the shell shock, we called it in World War One, but having to live with things they witnessed or things that they themselves did. Just the horrors. Yeah, definitely that's a hell on earth to be in the midst of it, but then to carry the memories of it with you. There's a reason why so many veterans end up with extreme mental illness, homeless, having a hard time adjusting. I know Diane Absher volunteers at the VA hospital, and partly is trying to bring clothes in for the folks that are on the streets who just can't bring themselves to be in the quote unquote regular. Anybody else?
Yeah, Angel's been making a lot of movies. I don't know how many people know about Angel Studios, but they made a movie Unbreakable.
I heard of it.
And basically it is Unbreakable Boy. And it was about this boy that was born and he's kind of high functional autistic, but he also had a calcium problem, so his bones broke easily.
Oh, geez.
And so it was all about, and in fact, when he was born and during delivery, they broke 2 of his ribs.
Yeah.
So they didn't know he was in pain.
Yeah.
And they just went, anyway, yeah, and so how the family went through and his brother went through, because his brother was normal, maybe a little undersized, but normal. And there was a boy that he really was all over them all the time, and somehow they got together. And, at the end, 27, and they learned how to live with all of it, but Dad had a drinking problem from it, so it was very hellish, I guess you might say, that for everybody to figure out how to dig out of it. So I won't say it was a fun movie, but it was an interesting movie to say, you know what, it's not so bad. You can't have a lot of.
Yeah, watching a loved one hurt and not knowing what it is and how to help, how to fix it.
I think families go through mental and physical abuse,
Oh, gosh, yeah.
and often it's hidden, and,
Yeah.
nobody, they don't tell anybody, they're afraid to, they're. And it's not just men physically abusing their wives, I've heard it can be the other way around too.
Not as often, but yeah, totally, yeah. And I mean, one of our guests for our Lenten series, and at the craft fair is Hanover Safe Place. That is a shelter and provides support for victims of domestic violence.
And
That's.
they are, when, if you take, like, MSF takes stuff to them, or,
Yeah,
but I have to go north of Ashland, they're not even in the regular.
Yeah.
Because they stay hidden, there's no sign that says they're there.
Yep.
Because they do not
yeah.
want the other spouse to
Yep.
come there finding them.
Every place I've ever served, there's a women's shelter. It is, domestic violence affects people of every race, every economic class. It's not just something that you think is happening, oh, in that part of town over there, like it can happen anywhere, like you said, it stays hidden. And imagine the hell of feeling trapped and feeling like you're being made to feel worthless and helpless, but knowing that this isn't right. And, yeah,
Roger's nephew, Tim, is in prison for life. And he claims that, and who knows, but he claims he didn't do it.
Mhm.
So that must be a hell. He feels like
Yeah.
he's trapped
Yeah.
and is never gonna get out for something that
Yeah.
he feels he didn't do.
There's lots of horror stories about prison, whether for those who did commit the crime and are trying to go through that rehabilitation, and for those who were falsely accused or falsely imprisoned. There's another book that we could read someday called Just Mercy. They made a movie out of it, but it's about a black man who went down to Alabama and founded a legal defense fund to help folks that were on death row that shouldn't have been, but also folks on death row that were just being treated like garbage, like trying to say, one of the lines is, should anybody be defined by their worst moment? Yeah. So yeah, we could go on and on. There's plenty of circumstances and situations that are very easy to kind of fence off from our consciousness of people digging themselves into hell, or maybe somebody else dug the hole for them. Sure.
One of the workshops that teachers, I suppose they still go through, is how to spot probably signs of abuse that, so. And we had to report anything we suspected whatsoever, but there are actually ways to kind of identify whether people are being abused.
Yeah, there's signs that make you want to check.
You don't have to have physical abuse.
No, there's emotional abuse, there's financial abuse, like keeping people from accessing any kind of independence. There's plenty of ways.
I would think that people who do hoarding would feel like that. They're kind of trapped in a place and they can't stop buying stuff and putting it in there
Yeah.
more.
Why'd you look at me?
Your imagination. I was looking at it.
Yeah, anytime where you feel like you can't control, right? Because human beings want to be able to control their lives, and of course, there's things that happen that are out of your control. But when it's something where you're like, I want this to stop, but I can't make it stop.
The TV show on the Borders is really interesting.
Yeah. All right, well, this is where he entered this story. And almost a physical need to learn more about this village that did something that was out of the ordinary, that it was a miraculous thing to do what they did, to risk themselves to help these strangers that they had really no reason to help. They didn't need to do this. And then as we get into this, one of the themes is that these villagers, even if they were these Protestants, and we're going to read about that in just a second, even if they were these Protestants who had this Christian faith, if you ask them, they're like, I didn't do this because I'm a Christian. I just did it because they needed help, because it's just the right thing to do. Like this baseline ethical stance of you help the people who need help. So that's what we're going to dig into. Let's look at page 23 now. I'm stepping a little bit farther back from the core of this. I want to get into Lutherans and Huguenots. Anybody ever been on Huguenot Road? Alright, well, we're gonna learn what a Huguenot is, alright? But I want to back up a little bit. The main clergy in this town is Andre Trocmé. He was the main pastor. And then, what's the other guy's name? Starts with a TH. We'll come across it. But on page 23, let's start about halfway down the page where it says when Andre Trocmé. And if you hit some French words, just mangle them with confidence and then we'll push on through.
When Andre Trocmé said goodbye to his children, he did not know if he would ever see them again. The maquis around Les Chambon was getting more numerous and more violent, and so were the German troops and the Gestapo. Those days were filled with disappearances and sudden death. But he was calm, almost joyous, not only in order to keep his family from knowing terror, but because for a long time he had been hoping for a test, a hard test. His warmth, the speed of his intelligence, the vigor of his pain-racked body that could work efficiently with only a few hours of sleep, and his luck had kept death away from him and his family and had brought admiration and love to them. Moreover, he had been efficient. He had created a rescue machine made of poor people who had enough problems of their own to keep them fully occupied. But he did not know whether he could be helpful under great pain and under the immediate threat of death. Now he would find out. He was like an eager chemist watching the results of his one last acid test that would tell him if the substance before him was indeed gold. The substance before him was himself.
Yeah, he's getting arrested. I probably should have said that.
Magda gave him 3 items, his freshly packed valise, a bulky package containing the gifts, and a pair of wooden shoes. In those days, the people of Les Chabon wore wooden shoes because they could not afford leather, and also because it was the custom, especially for the peasants on the farms, with their stony roads and monkey barnyards. Rumors about the internment camps told of their filth, both for Magda and Andre Trocmé. Those shoes were mainly a palpable sign of his oneness with the people of Les Chabon, a sign of his involvement in their everyday lives.
The 3 men stepped out into the Rue de la Grande fountain, which
Yep.
which runs along the north wall of the presbytery. The narrow medieval street was dark, and a lambeau
La Burle is a winter wind.
was blowing thin snow around the broken ice-covered stones in the road. On both sides of the crooked streets, their feet in the thin snow, villagers were lined up, looking fixed at Trocmé as he walked between the 2 policemen. Standing among the villagers were refugees from Central Europe and students and teachers from the Chabon school. There were also Darbists, rival Protestants, who did not believe in the necessity of having ministers or church.
As the 3 walked west down the street towards the high road that led to the village square, bystanders began to sing the old Lutheran hymn, "Mighty Fortress is Our God." Was I supposed to stand up when I read that? A woman named Strecker, sister of a half-Jew who had been arrested and released by the Vichy police, started that singing. The calm, deep-rooted song surrounded the 3 men while the villagers closed behind them, and the clop-clop of their wooden shoes, muffled a little by the thin snow, followed them up the street.
The singing of Luther's hymn embodied the Protestantism of the village. In this town of about 3,000 residents, there were only a few more than 100 Catholics, but throughout France, considerably less than 1% of the population is Protestant. That walk up the Rue de la Grande Fontaine and the whole story of La Chabot in the first 4 years of the 1940s cannot be comprehended in their depths without some understanding of the history of what was now an infinitesimal minority in France, the Protestants.
In the 16th century, when Protestantism came to France in the persons of Lutheran Lutherans, or Huguenots. The Protestants of France entered into a long period of suffering that would extend across 3 centuries into the French Revolution of the late 18th century. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre of 1572 was only one of the many bloody prosecutions that the Huguenots suffered. For 3 centuries, with only a few tiny cases of tolerance, those who were found to be loyal to the Protestant Reformation of Christianity were often stripped of their property, their liberty, and even their lives. The King of France had in the 18th century great galleys, which were manned by men whose only crime was that of being Protestant. For this crime, they slaved away their short, bitter lives. And there was the Tower of Constance near Marseille, where women convicted of the same crime were left to die of starvation, of cold, of heat, and of despair. Until the French Revolution, France was almost always loved as a wasteland for her Protestants. Their temples, and even this word originated as a term of diversion, suggesting pagan rites were raised so that worship had to be conducted in darkened homes or in secluded fields and woods. The Protestants had learned to accept all of this from the law of France, le mal, evil, harm.
During these years, the French pasteurs, the Protestant shepherds of endangered flocks, were often living, visible counterparts of a persecuted Jesus. Les Chambon was an old village when Protestantism came to it in the first half of the 16th century. During hundreds of years of persecution, her pastors and her people were arrested by the dragoons of the king and then hanged or burned, either in Les Chambon itself or in Montpellier to the south.
And it was a village with a stable population, a village whose history was not buried in unread books or forgetfulness. After the war, Roger Darsac, a historian commune, made demographic study of La Chambon sur Lignon. He found that in the 300 years following the Protestant Reformation in Europe, the population of the town had increased in number by only 1,000. The steepest, most dramatic change in the size of the population came with virtual destruction of Protestant rights in France, when the tolerant edict of Nantes was revoked in 1685. At that date, most of the entire 1,000 newcomers to La Chambon came to the village for prosecution. The village assimilated the newcomers and the population became stable again until the 1930s, when Thres and Troche rejuvenated the village by starting the Criminal School.
With such a stable, tightly knit population, history was personal and important. The story of the Huguenots was alive in the minds of the people of La Chambon. In the course of the occupation, there's I don't know what that's it, but out of a book of songs for young people. In it, there was a complaint, a song praising and mourning a pastor of La Chambon who had been arrested during La Desert and had been hanged in Montpellier. The book was illustrated, and one of the pages displayed a picture of one of the royal dragoons astride his horse, which was standing upon sand. Sand is for the Protestants of France a symbol of the desert that France was for them before the Revolution. Instead of drawing sand particles under the horse's hooves, their associates had, I don't know how to pronounce it, had the illustrators spell out certain messages in Morse code, dots and dashes, messages of indignation and the consolation of people of La Chambon and of France.
Solidarity and resistance not only in the face of persecution, but against the national establishments of France, the law of the land, combined with devotion to the pastors who have maintained that solidarity and have led that resistance, are central to the spirit of Protestantism in France. These feelings, refreshed and personalized by Trocmé's painfully achieved visits, he had a condition that just, he was in pain all the time, his back, his legs, his feet. So he would tromp around all the countryside of the village to visit the people, which really endeared him to them because they knew how much pain he was in. Painfully achieved visits had given a public forum by Trocmé's sermons in the temple against harm doing, were a part of that demonstration that dark night in the Rue de la Grande Fontaine. So that sets the stage for why this village may have been special. The Huguenots were, they weren't Lutheran, but they weren't that different. They had also been part of Reformations. Persecuted in France for generations and generations. And so what happens if you're often persecuted and your village, you're gonna stay close, tight knit, you're gonna look out for one another. They'd already taken in 1,000 refugees once in their history, and remember that, though those folks' descendants were still there. And you bring in these pastors who are preaching sermons about not harming people and living out the gospel by visiting people even though it brought them pain, right? So all of these things come together to set the stage for this village sheltering all of these Jews at the height of the Nazi occupation of France. Any other thoughts or questions on that? I just wanted to make sure that people kind of knew the background. Any other thoughts or questions on that, and then we'll wrap it up.
Not only was there that resistance to that one, but there's another town in France that was completely destroyed. They took all the women and children, put them in the church and set it fire, took all the men and shot them all, so it killed the whole city. And now what it is in that country, you drive down the road and the buildings are still there. Nobody lives in them, nobody's lived in them for 80 years, it's strictly a monument to all those people, so it was something that was happening pretty drastic in France at the time.
And so they were well aware of what could happen between the police that were collaborating and the Nazis, what they described the brown shirts or whatever, right? So all this was going on around them, and they knew very well what the consequences could be.
If you have not been to the Holocaust Museum in Richmond, I know everybody thinks of the one in DC, but the one in Richmond it's much smaller, of course, but it's very impactful. You should go to the Holocaust Museum.
Kate's class is doing a field trip there in the next week or two.
That'd be interesting, the impact that has on kids, because it is, I'm not sure all kids, of course, they may not understand all the meaning behind it, I don't know, but.
My older two read, has anybody ever read Night by Elie Wiesel? No? Okay, we did a whole unit on Anne Frank when I was in 8th grade, and it was the same year Schindler's List came out, so my English teacher got permission from the students to take us all to the theater in downtown Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, and go watch Schindler's List with 8th graders. We read Elie Wiesel's Night. It's a first-hand account of somebody who lived in concentration camp.
The Diary of Anne Frank is a good book
Diary of
too.
Anne Frank,
I think it's a movie too.
Yeah, there's so many witnesses to this, so that we don't ever forget that this could happen. And yet there's still people out there who are like, yeah, no, that never happened. That was all a hoax.
It'll get worse as we get farther away from it.
Oh, yeah. It's all the more reason to bring your kids to these museums to read these books together. There are plenty of stories in the Bible. He talked about crushing, right? How he's studying these things of people crushing one another. There's plenty of stories in the Bible of crushing, right? Of empires coming in and taking over and dragging people off, but it's not the same, even in the Bible, as it is reading firsthand accounts. Or going to the Holocaust Museum in DC and being handed your profile of you're this person, and you're gonna be put on a train and you go through the museum and in the shoes. So the Bible has plenty to say about what happens to God's people and what happens to any people when they're oppressed and crushed and traumatized and killed. But it's not the same as these stories. This will be a heavy read, but there's a lot of, like he said, joy that pierces through the pain as we read it. And so, for next time, you know, we've already read some of this, but go ahead and read that prelude and, part one, which takes you up through around page 76.
The reason I brought up that other town
Yeah.
is because they probably knew about that.
Probably,
That town was totally annihilated.
yeah, that
And
could
yet they
be
still
done.
went ahead and did this.
Yep,
So you got to think of what they thought about that, because that was well known by the whole world, the Nazis. Put all the women and children in the church and burned it to the ground and shot all the men in it. And to this day, the buildings are still there, nobody lives in it.
that must be quite
It's a
a
monument.
yeah. And, for a while, it wasn't completely out there what all was happening, but as the news got out, the world was horrified, and especially when the Americans and others arrived and started filming. I mean, you watch those films of those emaciated concentration camp prisoners. It's just
So we're reading just chapter 2 or
One and
or
two.
part 2?
part one, which takes you through chapters 1 and
1 and 2, okay.
yeah. Yep. So for those at home, hopefully you get a copy of this. Go ahead and read along and send us in your thoughts. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.